Hello, my name's Gail Thomas Strong, and I am so glad that you're here to learn how to move from a great idea to a great proposal. So during the time that we have together today, I hope that you'll walk away being able to do these three things, that you'll be able to assess the readiness of your organization to apply for a proposal or to submit a proposal. You're going to apply for funding, that you're going to review the elements of a successful program proposal, and most importantly, that you're going to consider the perspective of the proposal reviewer even as you begin writing. So here's what we know. If nothing else, the last couple years have taught us that everything we thought we could predict, we can't. And so we know these things, that people who make grants will tighten and or refocus their priorities to meet changing situations. I bet even where you are right now, you can think about funders in town who have done that. We can expect that grant makers will carefully look at first-time applicants. They want to make sure that if they invest in your organization, that their investment will be rewarded, and it'll be rewarded by service to the community. Grant makers want you to keep an eye on the long view. They want to make sure that in as much as you are focused on the here and now, you are also looking at tomorrow and the day after that and the year after that. So your ability to think strategically and long-term is also helpful. Grant makers want to look at your collaborations, at the outcomes you think your work will accomplish, what your organizational capacity is, how able you are to be accountable, and at the financial health of your organization. Grant makers are likely to query your finances carefully, and they'll look for evidence of resiliency. And I would say that even in as much as I wrote that sentence, I know that this past year has been extraordinary, and I know that many grant makers have done much to ensure the resiliency of organizations in this community. So when we think about proposal writing, there are two distinct roles. One of them is the grant maker, and one of them is the grant seeker, and you're likely the grant seeker. And so the grant maker, their job is to make sure that they are able to allocate resources, because what they really want to do is to better circumstances in the community. Those could be for individuals, it could be for families, it could be for organizations, it could be for the whole community. Grant makers, however, can't do the work themselves, and so they invest in organizations that can do that work. Grant makers spend a good deal of time working on not only understanding the community and what's real about the community, but also the complexity of the issues that you are trying to address. Assume that they know a lot and that they are deeply interested in your success and in the success of those that you're trying to serve. Grant makers also need to be good stewards of the money that they have at their disposal. They are entrusted with that money. And so that makes their ability to make wise choices all the more important. Okay, so let's shift hats. You are the grant seeker, and that's a different job. So your job, if you look carefully, they're all going to align, right? You are going to develop strategies that will better circumstances in the community. You want to do improvement, and you could do that improvement in any number of ways, but that's your goal, is to make things better. In order to do that, there will be guidelines that you will need to adhere to and comply with. That's going to matter as well. You'll need to be a good steward of money, of equipment, of resources. You too have been entrusted with resources that you need to shepherd in a good way. Your job is to see improvement and to seek it both. And so making sure that you have a plan for that matters. Your job is also to be honest and mission-centered. When you apply for a proposal, you're not doing wishful thinking. You are doing mission-centered prediction, and you are never to do things that would in any way be reaching 12 steps too far, right? A little stretch is good, a big leap is bad. So keeping your work mission-centered matters. And so let's talk about what it means to pursue a grant. First off, grants are not the only answer to the stability of your organization. It is one of many. And so, depending on how large or sophisticated your organization might be, you're going to have a funding mix. And that funding mix will likely include grants from a variety of funders. However, that your funding mix will also likely include some sort of an annual fund drive or membership fees. Your funding mix may include major gifts at whatever level you define those. Those might be gifts of $100, they might be gifts of $1,000. But the ability for you to migrate donors from small gifts to bigger gifts has to be part of your funding strategy. Some of you may be in a mode to be needing to upgrade or to purchase buildings or large pieces of capital equipment. That's not usually a part of day-to-day fundraising. It's sort of an extraordinary part of fundraising, but it could be a part of the funding mix that you are operating with right now. If you are an organization that's got some history behind it, you may have the ability to seek planned gifts. That is, those gifts that someone would leave you as part of their estate. That's a very specialized funding strategy, but it might be real for some of you watching this program today. And lastly, most of us have some sort of earned income or fees for service. That could range from charging admission to renting out some of your space to others. It might be class fees, could be any number of things, but it is not uncommon for many of us to use the resources at our disposal as a way to help bring in extra income. When we begin to think about how will we seek a grant, you'll want to make sure that you prioritize the projects. Most of us usually have 12 times more of things that we wish we could do than we can do. So what are your highest priorities? What will be the most competitive? And making sure that those are mission driven will matter. You'll want to make sure that those things are aligned with your organizational priorities and your strategic plan. So let's talk for a quick minute about the types of grant makers you might pursue. And before I do that, I want to acknowledge that you have a great gift and asset in the Indianapolis Marion County Public Library. The Social Sciences Collection is one that is highly specialized. It is a database and a collection of resources that are extraordinary, and they're there for you to access and to use, along with very specially trained librarians. Take advantage of that. They will have access to information that none of us, no matter how good we are at the internet, can access at home because they've paid for subscription databases. So please make sure to visit the Social Sciences Collection, particularly at Central Library. Okay, so that was an important thing for you to please take note of. So let's talk about where you might be able to access some grant resources. One of those might be community foundations. Community foundations exist in almost all 92 counties in Indiana. They are community-wide, right? They have been established as a way for people in a community to benefit their community. Funds within community foundations, and here locally, you could think about the Indianapolis Foundation, the Hamilton County Foundation, the Women's Fund, all a part of the Central Indiana Community Foundation family. Those funds can be designated by the donor, or they could come through some sort of a competitive grant process. So there might be a specific fund that only pays or only wishes to support one thing, and that's okay. That's the donor's prerogative. On the other hand, there might be competitive grant processes, and then there's a whole decision-making way that that occurs. Your opportunity is to discover the individual opportunities within that community foundation, and you can find that on websites. There are private foundations that you might access to. Some might be families' foundations. In that instance, it might be a donor or a donor's relative could still play a significant governing role in the work of that. I know it will take you exactly 2 seconds to think about examples of family foundations here in central Indiana. There will be independent foundations, some that make grants from their endowments and they have independent boards. Some will be corporate foundations. So an example of that might be the Lilly Corporate Foundation, right? That's very different than the Lilly Endowment. The Lilly Endowment is funded in a very different way than corporate foundations are, and two different governing bodies, two different levels of interest, two different ways of operating. So those are going to come from the contributions of a business. Recognition may matter to them. Some of them may have employees that will help to make decisions about grants. Some of them may require that before they make a grant to you, they have to have employees somehow volunteering in your organization. So that's a great opportunity for you to be in conversation with your board members because maybe they have access to resources that can benefit you. Operating foundations work only on behalf of a specific organization. So you'll know about them, but your likelihood of being able to benefit from them is pretty slim. The Riley Foundation, the Indianapolis Parks Foundation are two that you might think about. The public library has a foundation. The job of those three organizations is only to raise resources for Riley, for the public library, or Indianapolis Parks. So while you might be a partner in one of their programs, the likelihood is that you will not receive direct money from any of those foundations. Know that all private foundations are governed under tax laws, and they have to comply with those tax laws. So they will always have assets, certainly much greater than what they are able to disperse. Okay, let's talk about what's available publicly. There are funds available at the local level. These may come from state or federal programs. They're what might be known as pass-through funds. In other words, the Indiana Department of Education may receive some federal money, and then their job is to share it through a process with local school districts or 21st century schools, those kinds of things. There might also be money available through city or county entities. The state also has money available through pass-through techniques. Sometimes these are very targeted, and it's not as if there are always going to be a ton of open solicitations. Federal grant-making programs, there are so many federal grant-making programs that there's actually something called the Federal Register that you can begin to look through. We would give you this caution that these grants are going to be very competitive. They're very rigorous to compete for, to write for, and to manage. It's best that these not be your first grants. It takes just a little time to not only build up the grant-making savvy and the practice in this, but these will be large and can be very onerous processes in terms of record keeping, grant keeping, financial management. So be aware of them, learn about them, talk to people who have them, discover more about them, but this might not be the first one that you would apply for. Okay. So I'm going to guess that you're in this program because you've heard there's a ton of grant money out there, and there might be on any given day, right? But you have to have an organized and thoughtful way to seek and to apply for that money. You will know what system works best for you. Each of us organizes and thinks in a slightly different way, but generally these are the things that you need to do. And this might be you, you might be part of a whole department. You might be a two-person shop. Somebody's got to do this work. First off, you're going to want to create research files. You could do that on a spreadsheet. You could literally make a file. You could have a lovely index card thing, whatever works for you. But you will need to create research files that includes the contact information for the funder, the guidelines for their funding, the deadlines on which you might be able to apply. You're going to want to look at their annual reports. You're going to want to look at who they funded. Happily, all that's available online. But you are going to want to spend some time researching, reading, understanding all that. You then can create some program templates and some program budgets. These will give you the guts of some of your proposals, quite literally. I mean, if you have always done a mentoring program for people, you know pretty much what your mentoring program will include. You likely know what it's going to cost. And while you might tweak it, you're not very likely to do 100% change on that, right? So if you at least have some core language written and some core numbers on paper, that will save you time. You will want to develop an annual proposal plan. You're going to want to think about when due dates are, what you might propose for what. You'll need to know when their decisions will be made. It's rare that you can decide you're going to submit a funding request and have it just come through exactly as you planned. So your ability to be realistic about that proposal plan is going to be helpful and will lead to less disappointment. You'll want to forecast how much grant revenue you might be able to bring in a year, and you're going to likely need to submit multiple proposals. And I've written in here, not duplicate. What you don't want to do is send Foundation A the exact same proposal you're sending Foundation B, because they're different. You're going to want to tailor each of those requests to more adequately meet the needs, the desires, the aims, and the outcomes of those two separate funders. Now, they can be similar, but what you don't want to do is duplicate them. And I can tell you, as a person who reviews proposals, it is so easy to figure out when that has happened. When all of a sudden you begin to see answers on a piece of paper or on a screen that clearly don't match the question, but they're kind of canned. And you'll be able to figure that out. Funders know that in a heartbeat, and usually the response is, oh, if only they had taken the time to read the questions and answer our questions, we would be able to be supportive of this proposal. So don't put yourself in that trap. You're going to need to schedule time. This isn't an overnight kind of thing. I've already mentioned your need to do research, but part of what you're also going to want to do is some building of relationships, not only with the funders themselves, but with others who have received resources from those funders, taking time to meet with people, understanding more about their interests and their personalities will matter. You're going to need to have some internal team meetings. Perhaps you're in a large organization and Group A would like a funding proposal submitted, and so would Group B, and you might have to negotiate who has the stronger priority or who can do what kind of work. You might need to have internal team meetings around the thought that if you actually get this very large grant, how will it change the way that you work in your organization? What kind of systems might you need to put in place? What kinds of priorities might you need to adjust? You'll also need to think about the other stewardship activities you'll need to do as a part of grant making work. Okay, so now we're going to dive into some research. Your prospect research really will be highly individualized, and here's where it's going to help to talk with people that you know. You can visit the Central Library downtown. You can access these databases. That's super. We hope you do. You can also do individual research on the websites of different grant-making organizations. You can talk to colleagues. You can talk to others about how they have managed to apply for and receive these grants, what they've heard and are hearing. You can subscribe to newsletters and listservs. Many newsletters will say, here's some upcoming grant opportunities. What is important is that you take the time to do the research. that will lead you to success down the road. And remember that talking to colleagues and being open to other colleagues' questions matters, because not only are we all in this together, but because sometimes that can lead to interesting collaborations. And in the end, when you're applying for a proposal, the only person you're competing against is yourself and your ability to answer the questions appropriately, thoroughly, and persuasively. You're not competing with the person 2 doors down. You're only competing with yourself. And so come to understand your funder. Figure out who they are as an organization and figure out as much information as you can possibly find. You're going to look at their websites, you're going to talk to colleagues, you're going to look at other things that they've funded. You might have contacts on your board, or perhaps your neighbors, or people you worship with, or people you're in class with or work out with. Who knows? You never know who knows who, and what questions might lead to connections with funders. Don't underestimate how small this community can be, right? So your job is to determine the values of that funder. You want to understand their vision and their strategies. They're pretty upfront about this. These are the kinds of things we're interested in. This is why we're interested in them. You can look at who they've funded in the past and begin to put that picture together as well. Each of them has different temperament and little p politics. So some might want to think along with you for a while. Others might be really open to first-time grant seekers. That's great. Some might be an organization that say, submit us a draft proposal and then we'll give it back to you. There's one that I've recently worked on that we went back and forth 4 different times between the program officers team and the team that I'm working with. So that meant that even though we all thought that proposal would be submitted in finished form, that didn't happen for some time because we were going back and forth, really trying to make sure we got it as strong as we possibly could. The little p politics has to do with just understanding their place in the community and how they fit in with other funders. There are funders in town who have sort of put together coalitions and groups, and you'll just want to understand that because that just expands and or limits your possibilities. You'll want to understand who a grant maker has funded and why. So you could begin to look at their annual reports, their tax forms, and begin to see what kinds of patterns begin to emerge. You'll want to figure out what your timeline is as an applicant. So if you submit the proposal on April 15th, but their board doesn't meet till June 15th, and then you won't have a decision until June 30th, that means you're not going to get the check for several months, right? So you need to understand that and understand what that's going to do to your cash flow, and you need to plan accordingly. You'll want to make sure that you look carefully at the requirements for grants, and to the extent that you can, you're going to want to make sure you understand who at the foundation will receive your proposal, who will review it, who will approve it, and then ultimately who will manage the relationship with you. That may be several people, it could be several departments, it may go out to external review, it may be only reviewed internally, there might be organizational experts that, or topic experts that would review that. See what you can figure out about that, because that'll help you think about how to write it effectively. Okay, so here's what you need to do. First off, you need to be a 501c3. That's a tax status. It is also a status that enables a foundation to give you money. So if you are not a 501c3 and you're watching this program, that's your first job. And you can get resources about how to do that at Central Library. You'll want to make sure that your mission statement is relevant, that it is up to date, as is your strategic plan. You'll want to make sure that your strategic plan aligns all of your programs in a really nice way, including the one that you're adding into the mix. You should have an overall fundraising strategy, and you ought to meet a pressing need in your community. Now, sometimes those are globally pressing. Certainly the last year has surfaced several pressing community needs, right? But for your individual client group or zip code or organization, there may be pressing needs that are unique only to you, and that's okay. You need to be able to demonstrate that need. You need to make sure that you will match the interest of your funder. Some funders have interest in health promotion or in education or environmental sustainability or in social justice issues or, I don't know, you name it, religion, community development, leadership development. Every foundation has its own set of interests. You need to match those and you need to build the case. Your job is to be persuasive and accurate. You'll want to also be innovative in what you propose and demonstrate that your solution to a community problem has promise. Maybe it already is known to be effective. That's great too. But by and large, funders are not ginormous risk takers. They want to make sure that there's some solid footing underneath something. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take a risk, but risks are not the same as giant leaps necessarily. You'll want to be thoughtful about being in conversation, not only with the community, but with your clients and constituents all along the path in planning your proposal and implementing the work and in evaluating it. There are some things you'll want to think about internally as well. You'll want to think about whether or not this is really the right time to take on a whole new body of work. What's the capacity of your staff? What's the capacity of your board? Do you have all the right internal management systems in place, including your accounting system? You're going to need some somewhat specialized accounting to manage these grants. You'll be able to demonstrate that you have good program management and evaluation skills. That's going to be critical. You'll want to make sure that you have a good path and a good history, including organizational audits, that you have a good handle on what it costs to administer your program versus program costs, current budget. There'll be a whole financial package that you will likely need to put together. So not only will you want to begin to gather all those documents, but you'll want to make sure that your house is in order. You will also need to set aside time, not only to plan, but to build relationships and to write and to rewrite and to be patient. All these things take time. Okay, so you've got all that done, and now it's time to literally put fingers to keyboard. So what are some good tips? These are the things that I would encourage you from the get-go to write from the perspective of the person who's going to read your proposal. Think about the fact that they are literally going to be grading you and you want to do the best job possible. So try to get into their heads, and it's all the more reason for having done that research and being in conversation with people. First off, follow the rules. If they asked a question, it's because they want an answer to that question, not to the question you would prefer to answer. If they ask the question, answer the question. And if you're not sure you've answered the question, then have somebody read your answer and see if you did. Be focused on solutions. How can you make existing circumstances better? Make it be very clear that the community is at the heart of your work and not your organization. That all of us in nonprofits are in business to benefit the community. That's where our passion is. That's where our heart is. That's what we need to be doing. Your writing should be crisp. It should be compelling. It should be persuasive. It shouldn't be untruthful. This is not a time for long, lengthy prose. This is a time to get to the point. For writing sort of in the first person, we will, my agency will, my organization will. Those kinds of sentences communicate drive and energy. You'll want to use a tone in your proposal and a language that really matches your funder. it's a little bit of a mind meld there, right? The more that you read of what your funder has written or published, the more you'll get a sense of their language use. And the more you can kind of align with that, the better. If they're interested in community development and they have a very particular word for that, and that's exactly what you're doing, then use that word, because you want to show that you can be the arms and legs for the work that they want to do. You all know the tricks about autocorrect, autofill, and all the rest. Suffice it to say, just because you've written it doesn't mean that the grammar, spelling, and punctuation are what you need them to be. And we are usually not our best copy editors, so find somebody else to do that for you. Similarly with the math, as you do your budgets, maybe they have an active spreadsheet, that would be swell. Maybe they don't. So do your math, add them all up. If you want, if you're just not trusting your eyes, and it's probably a good thing not to trust your eyes, then have somebody else to do that for you, just so that you get second and third and fourth eyes on these kinds of things. You will do yourself a great gift if you build in time to make sure that people inside your organization and sometimes people outside your organization read your proposal before you ever submit it. Build in the time for them to do that. If you do it, I promise you your proposal will be better, because before it ever leaves your desk, you are putting it through 1 or 2 or perhaps even 3 review processes. They're finding where your arguments could be stronger. They're finding where you haven't answered the question thoroughly. They're discovering that even though you talked about renting vans in the narrative, you forgot to budget for that, right? So you want your internal colleagues and your external readers to find all your holes, so that a funder isn't reviewing your proposal and saying, I don't get it. Like, they wanted to rent vans, but I don't see any evidence of them paying for that. So I don't really understand it. Or saying that you're going to accomplish something, but then not doing a strong enough argument for how you're going to accomplish it. You want everybody else to find your mistakes and your shortcomings before it ever leaves your desks. And finally, there are due dates for a reason. So we encourage you to honor those due dates fully. Okay, so now we're getting into the actual proposal itself. So we'll spend the next several minutes kind of walking through key elements of a proposal. Sometimes the words will vary, and sometimes they might come in different order. In general, what we are about to tell you is kind of standard practice, and that might be whether you need to do a 40-page federal proposal or a 1-page letter to a corporation or a 3-page something to someone else. Generally, these are the elements that you should expect to find. That being said, your primary job is to answer the question that the funder asked. So that's kind of our caveat right there. Okay. So at some point, you will be asked to write a summary or an abstract of your proposal. Usually that comes right at the beginning. We are going to encourage you to write that last, because you want to do all your best thinking before you write the summary, and you won't have done your best thinking until you've written your whole proposal. That's also important that you write it last, because that may be the power and the persuasion of that may be what sort of gets you through to the next level of review. So you want to do a really super job on this. In your summary or abstract, which will be limited by length, you might have 50 words, you might have 500 characters, you might have half a page. Again, there's going to be a rule, but you're going to want to make sure that you have at least a sentence on the credibility of your organization, the problem you're trying to address, what you hope to accomplish, and the ways or the methods that you're going to accomplish that. So you have to smash your whole proposal into a very short amount of characters or sentences. You'll also want to include the whole cost and the fact that you already might have some money in hand and the amount of this request. We are always going to encourage you to invite funders into partnership with you. Okay? So this needs to be brief, needs to be clear, needs to be interesting, and you're going to hear the word compelling a lot. It is used a lot at the funding review tables. You've made a compelling argument. You know, you want to make sure that the funder thinks, I really just can't say no to this. They've convinced me. So do your best thinking right the beginning of your proposal at the very end. Got it? All right. So next, there will be some sort of an introduction. Think about this as part of the proposal that you could partway have written and stashed on your computer somewhere, because a lot of this won't change. You'll tweak it a little bit, particular to a funder. It's a bit like writing a cover letter. When you apply for a job, right? Your resume, you're just going to kind of tweak the cover letter and the resume to match each individual job that you're applying for. Same thing here. You'll have, I mean, it doesn't change, right? Who you are as an organization doesn't change, but you might just flavor the words a little differently. So the introduction will establish who's applying for the funds. It will describe your agency's purpose and the goals that you have in the community, as well as provide some description about the programs you offer and the clients or participants that you serve. Many of us have a track record of accomplishments, and this is a time to brag a bit, to say that you've won awards or you've managed to help clients meet all these amazing outcomes in the past, or that the mayor has recognized your work, or whatever it might be. This is a little bit of a bragging rights section, because part of what you're trying to do is build credibility as to why you are the most compelling organization to get this money. You will have some assets. You might talk about how you have a 50-year history, or you have locations in 6 different zip codes in town, or you have 500 highly skilled volunteers, or you have award-winning curricula that's been nationally evaluated, or that you have many partnerships. So what do you have in your laundry basket already? It's the time to call them out as your strengths and your gifts. You'll want to make a sentence or two about your credibility in the area for the program you're proposing. You might have data that you can cite. By all means, do it. But you want to prove that you are the best one possible to do this job. All that being said, your introduction will also be limited by character length or word length or a text box of some sort. So it has to be brief and interesting, and avoid big jargony kinds of things that might sound really good to you, but may actually blur what you're trying to say, right? So make it crisp and clear. And this should lead logically, as you begin to kind of outline this out, it should lead logically to being able to say to the funder, here's the problem that we're trying to solve. Okay, as we walk into sort of the next part of the proposal, there will be something that will say, why do you want to do this, right? What's the community needs you're trying to meet? We're going to encourage you to do 2 things here. One is to tend to a needs assessment, and the other is to review some of your organizational assets. So a needs assessment quite literally describes the gaps. It talks about what the current issues are, what issues may be heading down the road at us, and you're going to document that. You're going to grab data from a lot of different sources. You will have your own organizational records. There'll be state and municipal agencies. There'll be school data. There'll be data from the Indiana Youth Institute Kids Count directory. There'll be census data you can track. If you're in central Indiana, you likely know about the Savvy database at the Polis Center at IUPUI. So you'll also want to talk to some of your partners about the data that they have. You're going to want to document all the gaps, the things that aren't going well. Along with the numbers, you'll want to tell perhaps one or two crisp stories or anecdotes that would demonstrate that data, that would kind of bring it to life and give it some flavor. Um, Funders make decisions with their heads and their hearts both, and those crisp stories are part of what can make it compelling. In the end, that needs assessment is really critical for good planning, because that's going to lead you to new programs, to serving new target populations, to thinking about new services or new issues. Maybe you need to expand, or maybe you need to reduce. So the data you're going to need to use anyhow, right? So call it out and help the funder understand that you understand the problem. But then we never want to come to a funder just with our hands out and wishing, right? We want to say to them, no, we have strengths, we have capabilities, we have skills, we have gifts we can bring to the table. You want them to understand that. So you want them to understand that you have highly skilled staff, that you have a lot of volunteers, that you have these evaluated tools that you're going to use, that you are well and uniquely positioned in the community, that you are part of a collaboration and you add these 3 things to the collaboration and your partners add these 10 other things. You will be able to demonstrate through your asset review that you know how to steward resources well, and you know how to work with others to meet community needs. And then, having done all that, there will be some sort of a statement, and you literally can write a sentence that, or 2 or 3, that describes what it is you're trying to solve. If any reasonable person looked at all the data that you have assembled, you would be able to come to this logical conclusion. And the logical conclusion will always be stated in terms of your clients or your participants or your beneficiaries. It's never sort of you, right? So you would never say, if we just had this money, we'd be able to do these things. That's not a problem statement. A problem statement is the evidence clearly demonstrates that when this happens, and this happens, clients are likely to be less well off. And therefore, we are proposing this solution. So you will write the statement that is the logical conclusion of all the gaps, and then you'll begin to propose your solution. So does that make sense? It's kind of a turning point in the proposal from current state to future state. You ready? Let's dive in. So now you're going to do some program planning, and this is a really quick dance through program planning. However, each funder will ask these sets of questions in some way, so you should be prepared to answer them. You may well have developed a logic model already. You may well have developed a timeline. All that's great. And you may be able to insert those into the proposal, or you might have to just write narrative. So look for words that will give you clues about what to write. First off, sometimes funders will ask for goals. And if they do that, they generally mean what's sort of the broad description of where this proposal is headed. And usually those are not things that you can measure. But they give that sort of general idea of the work that the organization helps to accomplish. Those goals will be quickly followed by outcomes or objectives. Both words might be used, or one of those words might be used. And in that, you will write clear sentences or bullet points that talk specifically about how you will change your clients. What will be the attitudes, the skills, or the knowledge that they will receive, because that they will receive, not that you will do, but that they will receive because they've been part of this program. So those should be very clearly stated. They should be measurable and time specific. So in other words, by the end of a 12-week counseling session, this is how a person will be changed as a result of their time with you. So there will be some short-term ones. There may also be some that might take place, I don't know, a year, 2 years from now. And ultimately, for all of us, when we offer programs, we really, in the end, hope we change somebody's lives in a meaningful long-term way. So immediately in the proposal, you're going to talk about the short-term ones, but you should always have your eye on immediate and long-term. There are books available at Central to help you understand more about program planning. I would encourage you to talk with colleagues and coworkers about that as well, if you have a puzzle about that too. But you will always describe, as a part of your program planning session, you will always simply describe how your clients, your participants will be changed. You'll know if you've written a good objective, if you can answer the question, how would I know if this happened? And if you think you can measure it. If you can measure it and it makes sense, then you may be on a good path. We would encourage you that when you write these, that you always start by using the participants as the subject of the sentence, the verb will, and then the action verb that they will do. So all of a sudden, this feels like fourth grade grammar, probably, but you'll want to say participants will acquire, will demonstrate, will earn. What will they do? And if you do clients, the verb will, and then the action verb, it actually gives your proposal a great sense of energy. You'll follow that part of the proposal with a section that describes the methods or the activities or the strategies, or there might just be a question, how will you accomplish this? This is the place where it's clear you need to have thought out your work, right? Because these need to be intentional. They have to be connected to the outcomes, and they have to have meaning, so that if clients did these things, they would actually accomplish the outcomes that you predicted. As you describe these, you will end up beginning to articulate your evaluation plan. Because as you think about how many sessions people might be in, or how many people might participate, or what kind of certification levels they might achieve, you're going to begin, even in this moment, thinking about the things that you will start counting. Literally, how many sessions did they go to? How many products did they make? And the outcomes. What was the degree of difference? So your ability to begin to really articulate this early is going to make your proposal stronger. These should flow just supernaturally from the objectives. You should be able to look at an objective and say, wow, if we want a child to be able to be accepted to college, what do they have to do before they make that college application to likely make them more successful? So that could include certain high school classes. It could include some coaching in how to complete the FAFSA. It could be practice in writing college essays. Those are all the kinds of things that you would want to be teaching in a class like that. And so as you answer that question, what are all the things that they will need to do? You're going to want to start documenting that. The only sort of caveat around that is that the scope of activities that you take on ought to be reasonable within the time period that you're proposing to do the work. So if this is a 6-week program, there's a certain set of things you can do, and that's going to be different than if you had 6 months or if you had 18 months. So just be reasonable given your resources and the time constraints that you are operating under. Make sure that as you describe the methods or the activities or strategies, that you focus on these through the client-focused language as well. Personally, when I read proposals and when I review them, I get most excited when I can begin to make a picture in my head of what the clients or participants are going to be doing. I know that staff will be busy. I know that staff will be teaching and leading and counseling and mentoring, but I get most excited when I start to read things like clients will experience weekly sessions guided by a skilled therapist who will do whatever, right? You want to make sure that you're making a picture in the head of the person who is reviewing your proposal. You'll want to make sure that these activities are appropriate, not only given your organization, but they provide a little stretch for you as well as for your client. You'll want to likely answer a question about how will you choose and or recruit your clients? How will you advertise for them? How will you market this? How will you get the word out about this? If you have reasons for selecting a specific set of activities, by all means say them. You might say that best practices in our field would indicate these are the best ways to accomplish this work. You might have research studies. You might have a curricula that's been heavily evaluated. You might have industry standards that you should comply with in order to be effective. So if you have those kinds of things, by all means, call them out. You might also need to describe the staff who will deliver your program. You might need to describe special certifications or training that they have. If you have volunteers involved, you might want to describe how they've been chosen or trained or certified. So your goal in this part of the proposal is to give the grant maker a sense of what's going to be happening and to help them make a picture of the excitement you feel about that. A grant maker may ask for a timeline or a flow chart. If they do, and if they've given instructions, then comply with that. If not, then you likely have the opportunity to create your own. Okay, next comes the evaluation. This is often a weak part of proposals, and you can do a lot to make it be a stronger part of your proposal. You will want to describe the criteria on which you will evaluate the program, including the audience who your evaluation is intended for. Are you going to be reporting to your board? Are you going to be reporting to your partners? Are you going to be reporting to some sort of a national certifying body? The more you can describe about the criteria for evaluation and who it's intended for, the better. You'll want to have a strategy for documenting the degree to which people were successful in achieving the outcomes that you set out for them. So will you skills test them? Will you knowledge test them? Will you do observation of behavior? Will you have rubrics that you will grade people against? Will there be a final finished critiqued product in some way? Be sure to think all that through, and then also describe some of the counting you will do. What kind of record system will you put in place to make sure you know about how frequently somebody came, what their attendance rate was, what zip codes they came from, whether or not you were able to teach all the classes that you plan to teach, or to acquire the correct number of pieces of equipment. So just thinking about all those things that you need to count, which is different than describing differences. Put both of those in this section. Some of you may use external evaluators, and if so, that's great. Just talk about how you might select them. Some of you might train volunteers or staff or board members to conduct your evaluation. That's great. Describe that. And if you have very specific data gathering techniques, you'll want to certainly help the funder know what those are. Some of you may use test instruments that have already been created that you must implement. Some of you may be inventing your own. That's okay too. Each of you may be working under program constraints of some sort, or some sort of testing or industry standards. Make sure you describe those. Use this as an opportunity to say to the funder, I will be using this program data to improve my program. You know, we will do 6-week check-ins, we'll do 6-month check-ins, we'll do monthly recaps, whatever that might be. I know of some organizations in town that review program data at every board meeting. Some review that quarterly. Some do that as a leadership team on a weekly basis. But the point is, if we're collecting program data and we're using that program data, we are likely improving our program all along the way. If you're going to use some sort of specialized analysis techniques, certainly that's fairly sophisticated, but we would encourage you to describe that. And then describe how you will use that evaluation data. Will you publish it in an annual report? Will you use it to create a video about the program? Will you publish it and give it to funders? Will you put it on our website? Will you end up calling out specific moments for social media? Each of us can tell the stories of our success in new and exciting ways now. So using the data that you've worked hard to collect is really a thoughtful way to use that data. Okay, we are nearly to the end, but let's talk about money for a minute. First off, you will be asked to likely write a sentence or two about future funding if the program is to be continued. That might be called sustainability. It might be called budget. It could be called a couple different things. And you might be sitting there thinking, I don't even know how I'm going to pay for it right now. So how am I going to know how I'm going to pay for it in the future? They don't expect, funders don't expect you're going to have a 100% perfect answer for this, but you should be able to write a sentence that says, you know, we hope you'll be generous with us right now. But in addition to that, as our board finance committee continues its monitoring, they've committed to folding this in as a part of the annual campaign, or we are seeking specific donors for this portion of the program, or we are seeking additional funding dollars from these grant makers. Be as honest and as thorough as you can right now in writing that part of your proposal answer. It is okay, 100% okay, to say who else you have applied to. Let's say that your program is a $50,000 program and you've applied to the Smith Foundation for $25,000 and you're applying to the Jones Foundation for $10,000, and then you're applying to the Wilson Foundation for the remaining bit of that. You should say all that in each proposal, because the likelihood is that those grant makers will have conversations among themselves. And you are only increasing the likelihood of success if you are honest about that. Their goal is a better community, and they want to work together to do that. And so give them the tools that they need to work together to do that. Does that make sense? Hope it does. You may already have some funding in hand for this program, and if so, make sure that you describe that. I already have $40,000 in hand from a grant, but I lack the 25, and that's why I'm applying to you and your organization right now. So be thorough and complete in this. You'll want to make sure that your budget can be fully aligned with your objectives and methods. I will tell you that folks who review proposals can pretty much read a narrative and say, oh, this is how much this is going to cost before they ever get to the budget. And similarly, people can look at a budget and say, looking at the line items on this budget and what they've accounted for, this is going to be a program that does X, Y, and Z. And so you want to make sure that you've got that internal consistency, that if you've said you're going to do something, that you've figured out a way to pay for something. Make sure that you can literally draw lines from from your narrative to your budget. You will want to describe the in-kind, that is the non-cash, and the cash contributions of your collaborators as well as your own organization. Most funders want to know what else you have to put on the table. The in-kind gifts might be the agency vans, or it might be the expertise of a board member who's going to teach classes for you. The financial contributions of collaborators might be stipends that they are going to pay you to do some work. The point is that rarely will we not have something that we can contribute. And different grant makers will only pay for certain things. You know, I can think of a grant program that I had recently where I was able to pay for food to feed families. I had program partners who I needed to work with as collaborators. And you know what? Their grants would not allow them to pay for food. So it was really easy for me to offer that as part of my in-kind gift every time we did a program together. I never gave them money, but I always showed up with food. So that in-kind gift was part of what led to the program's success. Budgets are simply accurate estimates. We would encourage you to never pad a budget, that you shouldn't kind of think high and be prepared to negotiate low. It takes exactly 2 seconds to check what something costs using a search engine. And more importantly, the more that a funder looks at a budget, they know before ever checking that you've gone way high and that the expense is inappropriate. And if your expense begins to look inappropriate, then it begins to call into question your narrative. So if you need $5,000, ask for $5,000. Don't ask for 6, hoping to get 5. Ask for what you needed. Make sure your budget is free of error, and that if there's some sort of a template or a budget guideline, that you've followed that to the letter. Many of us will be able to use grant money to buy equipment, and if so, make sure that you have a plan for what's going to happen to that equipment. That's usually sort of a special inventory opportunity. Okay, so now you've pretty much written your proposal. So now let's just wrap it all up. First off, I encouraged you to submit a draft proposal to colleagues, to coworkers, to partners. Let them all read it. Let them find all your mistakes and opportunities, and then make the revisions they suggest. We encourage you, after doing that, then you write and submit your final proposal in whatever format the funder asked. If they've asked for those formats for a reason, you should comply with them. Some of you may have needed to find letters of support. You might have to submit memoranda of understanding or other supporting documents as a part of this. That's a great job for your team members to be gathering while you're doing all those final edits and writing. If there's signatures, if there's guidelines, if there's other kinds of checkoffs that CEOs or board presidents or whoever else have to do, make sure you have all that done so that that's not a gap when it gets to the funder's desk. And then your job, unfortunately, is to be patient. And that's the hardest part of this. It's the waiting, right? So eventually the grant maker will call. You may actually get a phone call, or you may get an email. Phone calls are fun. When they do, regardless of what they say, your job is to say thank you. If they say, oh my gosh, great news, we've given you all the money that you requested, then you certainly say thank you. If they say, oh, we sort of like most of what you did, but not all of what you did, then you say thank you. And what can I do to make it better? It's a lot like being in school. And if you didn't get the grade you wanted, you take your paper to the teacher and say, how might I make this better the next time, right? This is the exact same thing that you want to do. Remember that just because you weren't successful the first time doesn't mean you won't be successful the second time. And part of your goal in writing a proposal is to establish a relationship with a funder. And so you want to demonstrate in this moment, even if you weren't successful, that you care enough about the relationship with them to find out what you can do to make it better. And the happy accident is that when you ask them that question, it might just be the answer is, we actually liked your proposal. We just need you to resubmit it next quarter because we're at capacity for this quarter. I mean, I've literally had that happen. And that's great. If I hadn't made that call, I never would have known that. Other times, you might be told that your request was for 25,000, they were able to allocate 20,000. And if that's the case, then you say, super, I'm likely going to need to adjust some things. How much time will I have to do that? Because if you ask for 25 and they gave you 20, they don't expect that you're going to be able to do the exact same thing for $5,000 less money. So again, this is about the relationship and you having meaningful conversations about how to walk forward together. Recognize that your funded proposal is essentially a contract. Some of you may get actual contracts that will need review and sign off, but what you wrote is what they funded, and that's what you should be delivering. It's usually a good idea as soon as you get that grant to kind of convene that agency staff meeting and to outline all the expectations and who does what and who's on the team and whose accountability is in place to make sure that all the work gets done. As you implement the work, you'll want to make sure that you tell the stories to the public. You're going to be reporting to the grant makers. You're going to be reporting to your board. You're going to be reporting to your partners and looking for ways to tell these stories of success. Along the way, there will be reports that you need to offer as you monitor progress. You might need to redirect some of your work. You might be into it and your program evaluation is showing something that you didn't expect. And so you might need to change things. That's okay. Don't surprise your funder with that. Be in conversation with them about that. Seeking guidance, seeking permission, all that matters. We always do our best to submit reports on time. Sometimes life happens. And generally, funders are really good about saying, yes, if you need an extra 24 hours, if you need an extra week, that's fine. But this is an opportunity for you to seek permission in advance, not ask for forgiveness later. They understand life happens. They just don't like surprises when you've failed what it looks like to them if you haven't asked permission, that you're just sort of failing in holding up your end of the relationship, right? And you just don't want to do that. And then I've written rinse and repeat, because no matter how many times you are in relationship with that funder, that's exactly what you want to always do. And so that was a very fast dance through writing a successful funding proposal. We hope that as you continue this work and as you think about perhaps even how to begin this work, that you will take the time to visit Central Library to be in conversation with the librarians there about the resources that they have. And we know that you will do your best to be successful. We've hoped that we've helped you on that path. Thanks so much for being here.